I am Claire, 32 years old, and until last Tuesday, I thought my biggest problem with my family was their endless subtle demands for money. Then Chase Bank called to tell me I owed $700,000 on a mortgage I never signed. It turned out my golden child sister and her husband used my identity to buy their suburban dream house in Bellevue. At their lavish housewarming party surrounded by all their wealthy friends, they expected me to just swallow the massive debt to keep the peace. Instead, I slid a federal police report across the mahogany table and smiled. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to financially cut off toxic relatives. The ringing of my phone shattered the quiet focus of my otherwise peaceful evening in my Seattle penthouse. As a user experience design director for a major financial technology firm, my days were a relentless marathon of wireframes, stakeholder meetings, and user testing. By 7 in the evening, my brain was usually entirely fried, and I relied on the absolute silence of my apartment to decompress. I glanced at the caller identification on my screen. It read, Chase Bank Collections. I almost hit decline, assuming it was yet another sophisticated spam call. I did not have any outstanding accounts with Chase Bank. My personal credit cards were paid off completely every single month, and I aggressively managed my finances. I swiped the green icon with a heavy sigh, putting the phone on speaker as I walked toward my kitchen to pour a glass of water. "Hello," I said, my tone clipped and professional. "Good evening. This call is from the Chase Bank Home Lending Division. May I please speak with Claire Sterling?" "This is Claire," I replied, opening my refrigerator. "But I think you have the wrong number. I do not have any mortgage accounts with Chase." "Ma'am, this is our collections department. I am calling regarding your residential mortgage account. Your first payment of $5,800 was due on the first of the month, and we are currently showing it as 15 days past due. We are calling to secure a payment today to avoid any negative reporting to the major credit bureaus." I froze entirely. The cold water bottle in my hand suddenly felt incredibly heavy. "Excuse me, $5,800. I do not have a mortgage with you. You absolutely have the wrong person. Ma'am, for security purposes, can you please verify the last 4 digits of your Social Security number?" A cold prickle of adrenaline washed over my skin. "I am not giving you my Social Security number over the phone. This is obviously a scam." "I understand your hesitation, Ms. Sterling," the agent said, her voice remaining perfectly level. "If you prefer, I can read the last 4 digits we have on file for the primary borrower on this loan, and you can confirm if it matches. We have 4927. The air evaporated completely from my lungs. Those were the exact last 4 digits of my Social Security number. The prickle of adrenaline turned into a suffocating wave of pure ice. I set the water bottle down on the granite counter with a hard clunk. At 32 years old, I had spent the last decade painstakingly building my financial independence. I tracked my debt-to-income ratio like a hawk. I maintained a flawless 810 credit score. I was diligent, responsible, and intensely private with my finances. "Where is this property located?" I demanded, my voice suddenly tight and dangerous. "I can only provide full property details if we complete the security verification, ma'am. Can you confirm your current date of birth?" I rattled it off automatically. My hands were shaking now, a fine tremor that I could not easily control. "Thank you," she said. "The property address on the mortgage is 804 Maplewood Drive, Bellevue, Washington. The loan was originated and funded 45 days ago for the principal amount of $700,000. As the sole borrower on this file, you are responsible for the monthly payments. Are you prepared to make a payment today?" My vision narrowed dangerously. Bellevue is an affluent suburb just across Lake Washington. I had never lived there. I had never even looked at properties there. I gripped the smooth edge of the kitchen island, my knuckles turning completely white. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I did not sign any documents for a house in Bellevue. I did not authorize a $700,000 loan. This is severe identity theft. Do not report this to the credit bureaus. I need to speak to your fraud department immediately. I can transfer you to our fraud intake division, ma'am, but please be advised that until a formal investigation is concluded, the account remains active and will continue to accrue late fees." "Transfer me," I snapped. As the hold music chimed cheerfully through the speaker, my analytical mind began to race. You do not just accidentally take out a federal mortgage. It is not a simple credit card application. Securing a massive home loan requires tax returns, pay stubs, bank statements, and multiple forms of government identification. It requires an extensive, heavily vetted paper trail. Whoever did this had complete and total access to the most intimate details of my life. The hold music clicked off, and a new representative answered. Chase Bank Fraud Division. My name is David. How can I help you today? Before I could even open my mouth to speak to the fraud representative, my cell phone vibrated violently against the granite countertop. A notification popped down from the very top of my screen. It was the family group chat. The timing was so abrupt it felt like a physical blow to my chest. I glanced at the screen. The message was from my younger sister, Brittany. Dreams do come true. We finally did it. Marcus and I are officially homeowners. Come celebrate with us next Saturday for our massive housewarming party. Beneath the text was a high-resolution photo. Brittany, blonde, perfectly manicured and smiling radiantly, stood next to her husband, Marcus. Marcus, a tall, sharply dressed African-American man who worked as a mortgage broker, had his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, looking incredibly smug. Behind them stood a massive, newly constructed brick house with pristine landscaping and double mahogany front doors. And right there, bolted to the stone pillar next to the sweeping driveway, was a gleaming brass plaque with the house numbers, 804. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the brass numbers burning directly into my retinas. The address the collections agent had just read to me echoed loudly in my head. 804 Maplewood Drive. My lungs completely seized in my chest. The entire universe suddenly seemed to tilt violently on its axis, pulling the gravity straight out from under my feet. "Ma'am, are you still there?" David asked through the speaker. I hung up immediately. My hands shook violently as I zoomed in on the photo. There they were, posing like absolute royalty. Brittany, chronically unemployed and constantly demanding financial help from our parents, held a crystal glass of champagne. Marcus flashed his charming, arrogant mortgage broker smile. My phone chimed again, and the group chat erupted with responses. My mother Susan texted, "Oh, my beautiful girl, we are so incredibly proud of you. You deserve this magnificent home." My father Richard replied, "Hard work pays off. That is my girl. Marcus, you really pulled through. See you next weekend." I let out a completely hysterical, humorless laugh. Brittany had not worked a legitimate job in 4 years. Marcus was a smooth-talking broker with maxed-out credit cards and a history of terrible financial decisions. He had complained bitterly about his abysmal credit score at our Thanksgiving dinner just 2 months ago. Yet here they stood in front of a $700,000 property in one of the most expensive suburbs in the state. I dragged my eyes away from the phone and opened my work laptop. I logged directly into my credit monitoring account, a premium service I paid for precisely to monitor my financial health. The dashboard loaded quickly. My pristine credit score was staring back at me. But right below it in the recent activity section was a glaring, massive red flag. New account added. Chase Bank Home Mortgage. Balance $700,000. It was not a mistake. It was not a glitch in the banking system. My own sister and her husband had stolen my entire financial identity, walked into a bank, and purchased a luxury home under my name. The sheer scale of the fraud was absolutely breathtaking. I felt completely violated. This was federal wire fraud. This was my family chaining me to a massive debt that could ruin my life and destroy my corporate career. In the tech industry, executive background checks do not tolerate unexplained defaults. My mind transitioned rapidly from profound shock into the sharp, cold, analytical state that made me highly successful at my job. To originate a mortgage, you needed a mountain of documentation. You needed an underwriter to verify employment. Marcus. The name hit me like a freight train. Marcus was a licensed mortgage broker. He had intimate professional knowledge of the loan origination system. He knew exactly how to bypass the automated red flags. He had direct access to document portals and underwriting software. He knew exactly how to package a file to make it look completely flawless to a computer system. But even a corrupt broker needs the actual physical documents. He would need my Social Security number, which is not terribly hard for family members to find. But he would also need my recent pay stubs, my bank statements showing substantial cash reserves, and my original tax forms. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my hands against my forehead. 2 months ago at Thanksgiving dinner, I had driven out to my parents' house in the suburbs. I had brought my heavy leather work tote bag with me because I was in the middle of preparing my end-of-year financial portfolio. I had printed out a physical folder containing my last 2 years of tax returns, my recent pay stubs, and printouts of my brokerage accounts. I had left that tote bag in my father's home office while we ate dinner. Brittany and Marcus had been there. I distinctly remembered my parents keeping me occupied in the kitchen, demanding my help with the turkey, while Marcus excused himself from the table. He said he had to take an urgent business call in the quiet office. He was gone for almost 30 minutes. My stomach heaved violently. He had gone straight into my bag. He had photographed or stolen the documents right out of my tote while I was sitting in the next room with my parents. The betrayal was so absolute, so flawlessly executed by the people who were supposed to be my family, that it left no room for tears. I was completely alone. But I was not going to be a victim. I reached for my car keys, my mind locking onto a strategy of total ruthless destruction. The agent on the speakerphone did not stutter. Her voice carried the practiced mechanical authority of someone who deals with defaulting debtors every single day. "Mom, this is our collections department. I am calling regarding your residential mortgage account. Your first payment of $5,800 was due on the 1st of the month, and we are currently showing it as 15 days past due. We are calling to secure a payment today to avoid any negative reporting to the major credit bureaus." I froze entirely. The cold glass water bottle in my hand suddenly felt incredibly heavy. I set it down on the granite counter with a hard clunk. My analytical brain, trained to process complex data systems and identify user flow errors, immediately rejected the information being presented. $5,800 a month was not a minor credit card error. It was a massive, life-altering liability. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dropping any pretense of polite customer service. $5,800. I do not have a mortgage with you. I do not have any open accounts with Chase Bank whatsoever. You absolutely have the wrong person. Please remove my number from your call list. I reached to end the call, assuming this was an incredibly elaborate phishing scam designed to induce panic. As a technology director, I was highly aware of social engineering tactics, but the agent did not break character. "I understand you might be confused, Miss Sterling," the agent replied, her tone hardening just a fraction. "However, I am looking directly at your master file. This is a federal loan origination. For security purposes, can you please verify the last 4 digits of your Social Security number so we can clear up this discrepancy?" A cold prickle of adrenaline washed over my skin. "I am not giving you my Social Security number over the phone," I snapped, pacing away from the kitchen island and toward my home office. "This is obviously a scam. I monitor my credit report weekly. I have a flawless 810 credit score. I manage my debt-to-income ratio with absolute surgical precision. Every single financial move I make is calculated. I do not take out massive, undocumented loans." "I understand your hesitation," the agent said, remaining perfectly level and entirely unbothered by my anger. "If you prefer, I will not ask you to provide the information. I can simply read the last 4 digits we have on file for the primary borrower on this loan, and you can confirm if it matches your identity. We have 4927. The air evaporated completely from my lungs. I stopped walking, my heels planted firmly on the hardwood floor. The silence in my Seattle penthouse suddenly felt suffocating. 4927. Those were the exact last 4 digits of my Social Security number. It was not a random algorithmic guess. It was a precise, targeted data point extracted directly from my most secure personal records. A scammer trying to extract a quick wire transfer does not possess federal tax-level data. The prickle of adrenaline turned into a suffocating wave of pure ice, but I forcefully pushed the panic down. I replaced it instantly with a sharp, dangerous calculation. "That is my number," I stated, my voice dangerously tight. "How did you get that?" "Thank you for verifying," the agent continued smoothly, completely ignoring my question. "Now, to fully authenticate the account before we discuss payment options, I just need to verify your date of birth. We have it listed as October 14th, 1994. Is that correct?" My vision narrowed. They did not just have a stolen Social Security number. They had my exact date of birth. They had my full legal name. They had my direct cellular contact. The sheer magnitude of the security breach was absolute. Someone had bypassed every single financial safeguard I had meticulously built over the past decade. "That is my birth date," I answered, my words clipped and laced with absolute venom. "But listen to me very carefully. I did not sign any documents for a mortgage. I did not authorize a loan with a monthly payment of $5,800. This is severe identity theft. Do not report this past due status to the credit bureaus. I need to speak to your fraud department immediately. The hold music began to play a cheerful acoustic guitar melody that clashed violently with the cold fury building in my chest. I did not sit down. I paced the length of my living room, my mind rapidly shifting gears from initial shock into the ruthless analytical state that made me a top-tier director in the technology industry. I build secure financial platforms for a living. I design the exact digital authentication protocols that are meant to stop identity theft. I know exactly how incredibly difficult it is to bypass banking security systems because I am the person who maps out the defensive architecture. For the past 10 years, I had treated my personal finances with a militant level of obsession. I utilized highly encrypted password managers. I shredded every single piece of physical mail. I never logged into banking portals on public wireless networks. My credit score was a flawless 810, a pristine numerical reflection of my absolute control over my life. I did not carry a single dollar of bad debt. And now some invisible entity had successfully anchored a massive, deeply toxic liability directly to my name. The anger began to burn away the remaining traces of panic, leaving behind a crystalline, highly focused rage. Securing a residential mortgage is not like applying for a random retail credit card online. It requires an exhaustive, heavily vetted paper trail. An automated underwriting system demands 2 years of tax returns, recent pay stubs, verified employment history, and extensive banking statements to prove cash reserves. Someone did not just scrape my basic data from a random dark web leak. The sheer volume of intimate financial documentation required meant the thief had direct, unfettered access to my most private records. This was not a random cybercrime. This was a highly targeted, meticulously planned financial assassination, and I was going to completely destroy whoever pulled the trigger. The cheerful hold music clicked off, and the agent returned to the line. I can transfer you to our fraud intake division, ma'am, but I still need to read the property details on the file, she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. The property address on the mortgage is 804 Maplewood Drive, Bellevue, Washington. The loan was originated and funded 45 days ago for the principal amount of $700,000. As the sole borrower on this file, you are responsible for the monthly payments. Are you prepared to make a payment today? My vision narrowed dangerously. Bellevue, an incredibly affluent suburb just across Lake Washington. It is a neighborhood filled with sprawling estates, expensive country clubs, and manicured lawns. I live in a sleek downtown Seattle penthouse. I had never lived in Bellevue. I had never even looked at properties there. I gripped the smooth edge of the kitchen island, my knuckles turning completely white against the dark stone. Listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, dangerous whisper. I did not sign any documents for a house in Bellevue, Washington. I did not authorize a $700,000 loan. This is an elaborate case of severe identity theft. I am officially instructing you to freeze this account right now. Do not report this past due status to the credit bureaus. I need to speak to your fraud department immediately. I understand your claim, Ms. Sterling, the agent replied, maintaining her rigid corporate script. However, please be advised that until a formal internal investigation is concluded, the account remains active and will continue to accrue late fees. I am transferring you to the fraud department right now. Transfer me, I commanded, as the automated hold music chimed through the speaker. Once again, my analytical mind locked onto the terrifying reality. You do not just accidentally take out a massive federal mortgage. This was a highly calculated attack. The acoustic guitar hold music from the phone speaker felt like tiny, sharp needles against my eardrums. I walked away from the kitchen island carrying my phone and headed straight down the short hallway of my penthouse to my home office. The Seattle skyline glittered outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, forming a sprawling grid of perfect order and logic. I liked order. I demanded logic. What was happening right now defied both. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and tapped the trackpad of my heavy workstation. The dual monitors flared to life, casting a stark white glow across my face. I opened a new, highly secure browser window. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with practiced, aggressive precision. I navigated directly to my premium credit monitoring portal. This was an expensive executive service I subscribed to specifically to maintain absolute visibility over my entire financial ecosystem. The login screen demanded my complex master password, followed by a secondary biometric authentication protocol. I pressed my thumb firmly against the biometric scanner pad on my desk. The system verified my identity in a fraction of a second, granting me access. The irony of the situation was incredibly bitter. I possessed military-grade security on my personal devices, yet some invisible phantom had just convinced a major federal institution to hand over nearly $1 million using my exact name. The main dashboard loaded heavily. I stared at the screen, my eyes automatically scanning the data hierarchy exactly the way a user experience director analyzes a digital interface. At the top right corner, my credit score sat safely inside a bright green circle, 810. It was immaculate. It had taken me a decade of ruthless, disciplined financial behavior to achieve and maintain that specific number. But my eyes did not stay on the score for more than a second. Dead center on the dashboard, completely disrupting the usual clean white layout, was a massive, glaring red alert banner. It was a critical notification, the exact kind of aggressive visual warning designed specifically to induce immediate action and panic in the user. I clicked the red banner without hesitation. The interface expanded downward, revealing a highly detailed chronological log of my recent financial activity. My heart hammered a heavy, painful rhythm against my ribs as I read the newly populated data fields. New account added. Creditor name, Chase Bank Home Lending. Account type, conventional residential real estate mortgage. Loan term, 30 years. Current balance, $700,000. Status, 15 days past due. Date opened exactly 45 days ago. I leaned forward until my face was only inches from the glowing monitor. I read the numbers again, tracing the digits on the glass screen with my index finger. $700,000. It was not a typo. It was not a delayed reporting error from my previously paid-off student loans. The system was showing a massive, active, highly toxic liability firmly attached directly to my Social Security number. I clicked into the deep audit view of the credit report, bypassing the consumer-friendly dashboard to access the raw data logs. I needed to see the structural anatomy of this massive fraud. I scrolled down to the section, detailing hard credit inquiries. Whenever a person applies for a massive loan, the lending institution must perform a hard pull on their credit profile to verify their financial standing. This action leaves a permanent digital footprint with a precise date and timestamp. There it was, a hard inquiry initiated by the Chase Bank Mortgage Division. The date of the inquiry was precisely 60 days ago. I stared at that specific date, my analytical mind rapidly processing the timeline. 60 days ago, a conventional mortgage usually takes 15 to 30 days to clear the underwriting process and officially close. The math aligned perfectly. Someone had applied for the loan 60 days ago, it was approved and funded 45 days ago, and the first massive payment was due exactly 15 days ago. But to get an approval of that sheer magnitude, the applicant had to submit extensive physical documentation. A bank does not simply hand out a $700,000 check because someone typed my name into an online form. The underwriter would have strictly required my original W-2 tax forms, my most recent pay stubs, and highly detailed bank statements, proving I had the necessary liquid cash to cover the massive down payment and the closing costs. The sheer scale of the deception was paralyzing. Whoever orchestrated this transaction had complete unrestricted access to my physical financial portfolio. They knew my income, they knew my organizational habits, they knew exactly how to package my financial identity to seamlessly bypass the strict automated risk assessment algorithms of a federal bank. I sat back in my heavy leather chair, the glow of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. The initial wave of blinding panic completely evaporated. The biological response of fear was forcefully shut down, instantly replaced by a freezing, calculated rage. I was not dealing with a random hacker in a foreign country. Hackers steal credit card numbers to buy cheap electronics online. They do not steal tax returns to originate 30-year conventional mortgages for luxury properties in Bellevue. This required intimate physical access. It required someone who knew exactly where I kept my private documents. It required a professional who understood the intricate, heavily regulated mechanics of the real estate industry. I stared at the red alert banner on my screen. The trap had been flawlessly executed, and I was currently standing right in the center of the blast radius. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed I would panic. They assumed I would be paralyzed by the massive corporate machinery of the bank. They did not realize that I understood digital systems' legal architecture and structural vulnerabilities far better than they ever could. I was going to dismantle this entire operation piece by piece, and I was going to absolutely ruin the lives of the people who built it. The heavy silence in my home office was abruptly shattered. My cell phone, which was sitting flat on the mahogany desk right next to my keyboard, vibrated violently. A bright notification banner popped down from the very top edge of the screen, completely interrupting my intense focus on the credit monitoring dashboard. It was the family group chat. The timing of this message was so incredibly precise that it felt like a deliberate physical blow directly to my chest. I dragged my eyes away from the glaring red alert on my computer monitor and glanced down at the glowing screen of my phone. The message was from my younger sister, Brittany. Dreams do come true. We finally did it. Marcus and I are officially homeowners. Come celebrate with us next Saturday for our massive housewarming party. Directly beneath that sickeningly cheerful text was a high-resolution photograph. I picked up the phone and stared at the image. Brittany, perfectly manicured and smiling radiantly, with that practiced entitlement she always carried, stood proudly in the center of the frame. Beside her was her husband, Marcus. Marcus was a tall, sharply dressed African-American man who worked as a commercial mortgage broker. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit and a crisp white shirt, holding a crystal glass of champagne. He had his arm wrapped tightly around my sister's waist, flashing an incredibly smug, arrogant smile at the camera. He looked exactly like a man who believed he had just successfully conquered the world. Behind them stood a massive, newly constructed red brick colonial mansion. It featured pristine, manicured landscaping, towering oak trees, and heavy double mahogany front doors. It was the absolute picture of suburban wealth and success. But my eyes did not linger on the expensive architecture or the designer clothing they were wearing. My gaze was immediately drawn to a specific detail bolted to the heavy stone pillar directly next to their sweeping paved driveway. It was a gleaming brass plaque clearly displaying the property address numbers, 804. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the brass numbers burning directly into my retinas. The exact address the Chase Bank collections agent had just read to me only minutes ago echoed loudly and violently inside my head. 804 Maplewood Drive, Bellevue. My lungs completely seized in my chest. The entire universe suddenly seemed to tilt violently on its axis, pulling the gravity straight out from under my feet. It was not a random coincidence. It was not a glitch in the banking matrix. The massive $700,000 fraudulent mortgage sitting on my credit report was literally the brick-and-mortar house my sister was currently standing in front of. My phone chimed again and again as the family group chat immediately erupted with rapid responses. My mother, Susan, texted almost instantly, "Oh, my beautiful girl, we are so incredibly proud of you. You deserve this magnificent home." My father, Richard, replied immediately after, "Hard work truly pays off. That is my girl. Marcus, you really pulled through for her. See you both next weekend." I let out a completely hysterical, humorless laugh that sounded entirely foreign in the quiet office. Hard work. Brittany had not worked a legitimate paying job in over 4 years. She spent her days lounging at expensive cafes and constantly demanding financial bailouts from our parents. And Marcus was a smooth-talking mortgage broker with a long history of terrible financial decisions. He was drowning in maxed-out credit cards. He had complained bitterly about his completely abysmal credit score at our Thanksgiving dinner just 2 months ago. Yet here they stood posing like absolute royalty in front of a $700,000 property in one of the most exclusive, expensive suburbs in Washington state. The math was completely impossible. You do not go from maxed-out credit cards to a luxury home overnight unless you are spending someone else's money, or in this specific case, someone else's immaculate financial identity. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together, forming a terrifying, crystal-clear picture of absolute betrayal. Marcus did not just borrow my name. He weaponized his professional knowledge of the lending industry to completely hijack my decade of hard work. And my parents were currently sending heart emojis to the very people who had just committed severe federal wire fraud against their eldest daughter. I did not type a single word into the group chat. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the desk. The cold, calculated rage that had been simmering in my veins finally reached a boiling point. I was entirely done being the reliable, silent background character in my family's toxic narrative. I did not wait for David from the fraud division to finish reading his required corporate script. I pressed the red button on my screen and terminated the call immediately. The cheerful acoustic hold music vanished, leaving my penthouse in absolute silence. I did not need a customer service representative to explain to me how my identity was stolen. I needed to map the exact architecture of the crime. I sat in the cold glow of my dual monitors, resting my hands flat against the smooth surface of the mahogany desk. As a user experience design director, my entire professional existence is dedicated to understanding complex digital systems, anticipating human behavior, and exploiting structural vulnerabilities. I closed my eyes and began to mentally reverse engineer the massive financial trap I was currently standing inside. Marcus was a commercial mortgage broker. He possessed a federal license and daily access to the central nervous system of the real estate lending industry. He utilized an automated underwriting system to process his loans. The software is designed entirely for efficiency. If a broker inputs a pristine credit score, a remarkably low debt-to-income ratio, and a solid employment history, the automated system bypasses human scrutiny and issues an immediate digital approval. My flawless financial profile was the absolute perfect key to unlock that exact system. But Marcus could not simply type my name into a banking portal and walk away with nearly $1 million. The underwriting software strictly requires verified supporting documentation. It requires high-resolution scans of original W-2 tax forms, consecutive corporate pay stubs, and highly detailed banking statements to prove the borrower has the liquid cash to close. Marcus could easily fake an email address, but he could not digitally fabricate 2 years of official federal tax transcripts from scratch. He needed the physical copies. He needed my actual tangible records in his hands. Furthermore, a lender requires a verification of employment to ensure the borrower actually works where they claim they do. If Chase Bank had contacted my human resources department, I would have been notified immediately. How did Marcus intercept the verification? He must have registered a fake domain name that looked nearly identical to my tech company's domain, changing perhaps one single letter. He routed the electronic verification forms to that fake domain, acted as my human resources representative, and illegally verified my employment himself. But that still left the fundamental problem of the physical tax documents. Where did he get them? My eyes snapped open. The climate-controlled air in my penthouse suddenly felt suffocating as a specific memory rushed into my brain with terrifying absolute clarity. 2 months ago, the 4th Thursday of November, Thanksgiving dinner. I had driven out to my parents' house in the suburbs for the mandatory family holiday. I was in the middle of preparing my comprehensive end-of-year financial portfolio for my wealth management firm. I had brought my heavy black leather work tote bag with me. Tucked safely inside the zippered middle compartment was a thick sealed manila folder containing exactly what Marcus needed. My original W-2 forms, my corporate pay stubs, and comprehensive printouts of my brokerage accounts. When I arrived at this house that afternoon, I placed my heavy tote bag on the leather armchair in my father's private study just off the main living room. It was a space typically completely off limits during family gatherings. I thought my sensitive documents were perfectly secure. I walked back through the timeline of that afternoon, analyzing every single interaction frame by frame like a security camera feed. Shortly after I arrived, the dynamic in the house noticeably shifted. My mother, Susan, became incredibly aggressive with her hospitality. She practically dragged me into the kitchen away from the rest of the house. She handed me a large glass of red wine and demanded my absolute undivided attention. She insisted I help her carve the turkey, prepare the side dishes, and listen to her endless dramatic stories about her wealthy country club friends. My father, Richard, stood physically blocking the kitchen doorway. He repeatedly engaged me in intense, rapid-fire conversations about the technology industry, asking unusually detailed questions that required long, complex answers. They kept me completely pinned in that kitchen for nearly 45 minutes. They were running a meticulously coordinated interference. And where was Marcus during this highly orchestrated distraction? I vividly remembered Marcus standing up from the dining table holding his cell phone to his ear. He announced loudly to the room that he had to take an incredibly urgent call from a high-net-worth client. He apologized profusely and walked straight down the hallway, toward my father's study, toward my leather bag. I was gone for exactly half an hour. He had not been talking to a client. He had been standing in the quiet solitude of that study, digging directly through my personal belongings. He likely used his high-resolution smartphone camera to systematically photograph every single page of my tax returns and pay stubs, scanning the documents directly into his secure brokerage application. But someone who did not know my specific organizational habits would have had to unpack the entire bag, leaving a noticeable mess. When I retrieved my tote at the end of the night, the zipper was perfectly closed. Everything was exactly in its proper place. Marcus did not just stumble upon my documents blindly. He had inside help. I had explicitly mentioned to my father earlier that week that I was organizing my tax documents for my wealth manager. I had handed my father the exact timeline and location of my financial records on a silver platter. The horrifying, sickening truth settled heavily into my bones. This was not a crime of opportunity committed by a desperate rogue brother-in-law. This was a premeditated, coordinated heist executed by my entire family. My parents were not merely passive enablers who looked the other way to keep the peace. They were active, willing accomplices in a federal crime. They had actively trapped me in the kitchen. They had served me wine and smiled directly in my face while actively plotting to saddle me with a massive, unauthorized $700,000 debt. Why? Because in their deeply toxic, twisted logic, my success was their personal property. They believed that because I was a financially independent woman with no husband and no children, I had a fundamental moral obligation to fund my younger sister's luxury lifestyle. They saw my flawless credit score and corporate salary as a family asset that they had every right to leverage for their favorite child. It did not matter to them if they completely destroyed my executive career in the process, as long as Brittany got to show off a massive mansion to her friends. I sat in the absolute silence of my office. Any lingering sense of shock, any residual biological instinct to seek my parents' approval or love instantly evaporated. It was permanently replaced by a crystalline, freezing void. The emotional death of my familial bonds was absolute and instantaneous. They were no longer my parents. Brittany was no longer my sister. They were simply hostile liabilities that needed to be neutralized. They had built a flawless financial trap to destroy my life, but they completely failed to realize exactly who they were trapping. I reached for my car keys. Wednesday morning arrived with the unforgiving chill of a heavy Seattle downpour. I woke exactly at 5:30, my mind operating with the ruthless efficiency of a compiled code script. I skipped coffee entirely. The cold calculation of my impending retaliation was more than enough adrenaline. I dressed in a sharp-tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white blouse, and my most uncomfortable pair of leather heels. The kind of suit you wear when you are about to completely dismantle a corporate hierarchy. I grabbed my heavy leather briefcase, slid the printed credit report inside, and locked my penthouse door. The morning air was biting as I stepped onto the wet pavement. I did not walk toward the technology campus where I usually spent my days. Instead, I drafted a highly concise email to my vice president, stating I had a severe family emergency requiring my immediate attention, and I would be entirely offline for the next 48 hours. My career was my sanctuary, but if I did not ruthlessly sever this fraudulent anchor, I would not have an executive career left to protect. I hailed a passing cab and gave the driver the address for the regional corporate headquarters of Chase Bank in the downtown financial district. This was not a standard retail branch. This was the commercial hub, the massive glass structure equipped with regional managers and high-level fraud investigators. When the cab pulled up to the towering building, I paid the fare and stepped out. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer, squared my shoulders, and walked through the heavy revolving doors with the kind of cold, undeniable authority that makes building security guards instinctively step aside. The expansive lobby was filled with the low hum of corporate banking. I bypassed the standard customer service queues entirely. I walked directly to the heavy mahogany reception desk positioned in front of the executive offices. A polished administrative assistant looked up, her professional smile securely in place. "Good morning," she said. "How can I direct you today?" My voice was dangerously calm, carrying clearly across the quiet reception area. "My name is Claire Sterling. I am the victim of a massive coordinated identity theft resulting in a fraudulent $700,000 mortgage originated through this specific institution. I require an immediate in-person meeting with your Regional Director of Risk Management. I will not be leaving this building until I have the complete digital origination file in my hands." Her smile faltered instantly, her hands hovering nervously over her keyboard. "I am sorry, ma'am. Those appointments require advanced scheduling." I dropped my heavy leather briefcase onto her desk with a loud, solid thud. "Check your internal system for the mortgage account under my name. It is currently past due. If a risk director is not sitting across from me in the next 5 minutes, my very next stop is the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, followed immediately by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I will name this specific branch and you personally in my federal report for actively refusing to assist a verified victim of federal wire fraud." She swallowed hard quickly, typing my name into her terminal. Her eyes widened in absolute shock as the massive red flags undoubtedly populated on her screen. "Please take a seat in the lounge, Ms. Sterling," she stammered. "I will get someone immediately." I did not sit. I stood perfectly still, watching the glass doors. Minutes later, a tall man in a tailored navy suit hurried out of a corner office holding a digital tablet. He looked incredibly tense. "Ms. Sterling," he asked, extending his hand. "I am Julian Pierce, the Regional Director of Risk Management. Please come into my office." I ignored his hand completely and followed him into the glass-walled room. He closed the door, shutting out the lobby noise. Julian gestured to a leather chair, but I preferred to remain standing, asserting complete physical dominance over the room. I unclasped my briefcase and pulled out my manila folder. "Last night, your collections department contacted me regarding a residential property in Bellevue," I stated, slapping the printed credit report directly onto his desk. "I did not purchase this property. I have never visited this property. A third-party mortgage broker named Marcus stole my highly sensitive financial documents and bypassed your automated underwriting system to secure this massive loan. He then used a fraudulent electronic signature platform to finalize the closing disclosures. I need the complete electronic master file, including the digital signature certificates, right now." Julian adjusted his tie, looking nervously at the paperwork and then at his tablet. "Identity theft of this magnitude is incredibly rare, Ms. Sterling. Our underwriting protocols are incredibly stringent. Your protocols failed catastrophically," I countered, leaning heavily over his desk. "And your institution is currently holding a severely toxic asset. If you want to mitigate your massive corporate liability, you will open the electronic origination logs right now and show me the digital trail." Julian hesitated, but the sheer undeniable gravity of my documentation left him absolutely no choice. He turned his large monitor so we could both see the screen. He entered his administrative credentials and pulled up the master file for the Bellevue property. The screen populated with hundreds of pages of digital documents. "Scroll down to the final closing disclosures," I commanded. He scrolled through the uniform residential loan application, past the fake verification of employment that Marcus had undoubtedly fabricated, and finally reached the massive packet of closing documents. These were the highly sensitive documents that required my legally binding signature to finalize the massive federal loan. I pointed to the digital signature line at the bottom of the first page. "Open the electronic audit trail," I instructed, my voice completely flat. "Every time a digital document is signed, the software generates a tamper-evident certificate. This certificate records the exact time, the email address, and the precise Internet Protocol address of the device used to execute the signature." Julian clicked the small digital icon, bringing up the master certificate. I scanned the raw data, my eyes narrowing as I processed the information, exactly like a developer debugging a broken code sequence. There it was, the smoking gun. The email address used to route all the electronic signatures was registered as claire.sterling.finance@gmail.com. I pointed at the screen. "I do not use Gmail for anything. I use a secure encrypted email provider for all personal matters, and my corporate email does not use that format." Marcus created a fake burner email address specifically to intercept the signing links. Julian was pale. "Look at the Internet Protocol address," he said softly, pointing to a long string of numbers logged directly next to the signature timestamp. The geographical pin dropped precisely onto an address in downtown Seattle. I looked at the address mapped on the screen. It was a commercial office building. "That is the exact registered location of his commercial mortgage brokerage office," I stated, my voice ringing with undeniable triumph. "He executed the digital signatures from his own work computer. Print that entire log right now." Julian nodded, his fingers moving frantically across his keyboard to send the highly sensitive audit logs to the heavy industrial printer in the corner of his office. The machine hummed to life, churning out page after page of undeniable digitized proof of Marcus committing federal wire fraud. I stood by the printer, collecting the warm sheets of paper and sliding them carefully into my leather briefcase. "This changes everything." "Miss Sterling," Julian said, his voice trembling slightly as he watched me gather the devastating evidence, "I am officially freezing this account right now. Our internal fraud division will seize the master file immediately." "Make sure you do," I replied, securing the heavy brass clasps on my briefcase. "I will be submitting my own official police report with the local financial crimes unit this afternoon. Expect a federal subpoena for these exact documents." I did not wait for his apology or his hollow corporate pleasantries. I turned and walked out of his glass office, leaving him to deal with the radioactive fallout of his bank's massive underwriting failure. I navigated back through the quiet corporate lobby and pushed through the heavy revolving doors, stepping out into the cold Seattle morning. I had the absolute digital proof. The weapon was loaded. I stepped out of the heavy revolving doors of the Chase Bank corporate headquarters and directly into the cold, unforgiving Seattle rain. I held my heavy leather briefcase tightly against my side. Inside that briefcase was the absolute digital proof of my brother-in-law's criminal enterprise. I had the electronic signature logs. I had the fraudulent internet protocol addresses mapped directly to his commercial brokerage office. The federal wire fraud was undeniable and perfectly documented. But as I walked down the wet pavement, my highly analytical mind could not stop running the complex financial algorithms of the transaction. Something in the math was fundamentally broken. A massive piece of the puzzle was still entirely missing. As a technology director, I understand that systems require inputs to generate outputs. A $700,000 residential property is a massive output. You cannot simply finance 100% of a luxury mansion in Bellevue without putting down a substantial amount of liquid cash. Even with an absolutely flawless credit score like mine, the federal underwriting guidelines require a minimum down payment to clear the closing costs. A conservative estimate meant someone had to physically wire at least $100,000 in pure liquid cash to the title company on the day of closing. I stopped walking and stood under the canvas awning of an upscale coffee shop, completely ignoring the bustling morning commuters around me. I mentally reviewed my own personal financial portfolio. I had aggressively checked my banking portals the previous night. My high-yield savings accounts were completely untouched. My corporate stock portfolios and brokerage accounts were fully intact. Marcus did not steal a single dollar of my actual cash. He only hijacked my immaculate credit profile and my income history to secure the loan approval. So where did the massive pile of liquid cash come from? Marcus and Brittany were completely drowning in high-interest consumer debt. They lived aggressively paycheck to paycheck, desperately trying to maintain a fake wealthy lifestyle for social media. They could barely afford the monthly lease payments on their luxury vehicles. They absolutely did not have $100,000 sitting in a checking account. I pulled my cell phone out of my coat pocket. I needed to test a highly specific and incredibly dark theory. I navigated to my contacts and dialed my mother directly. The phone rang exactly twice before Susan answered, her voice bubbling with that artificial country club joy she always wore like a highly polished mask. "Claire, darling," she said, her tone dripping with fake warmth. "Did you see the beautiful photos in the family group chat last night? Is it not just absolutely wonderful? Your sister finally has a beautiful home of her own. She is so incredibly happy." I kept my voice entirely dead flat. I did not allow a single ounce of emotion to bleed through the cellular connection. "It is a massive house, Susan. How exactly did Marcus and Brittany afford a $700,000 property in Bellevue when neither of them has 2 dimes to rub together?" My mother scoffed loudly through the speaker. Her artificial joy was instantly replaced by severe defensive irritation. "There you go again," she snapped. "You are always so negative and so incredibly jealous of your sister. Marcus is a brilliant commercial broker. He worked his professional magic with the paperwork. He told us he found a highly specialized loan program that did not require Brittany to show her direct income. He handled all the heavy lifting. You should be completely happy for your sister Claire instead of calling me early in the morning to interrogate me." a specialized program. I repeated the cold fury wrapping tightly around my spine like a frozen wire. Did Marcus happen to mention what this magical financial program was called? Because as a professional in the financial technology sector, I am entirely unaware of any federal banking program that hands out free mansions to unemployed people with completely toxic credit scores. I do not know the technical banking terms. Claire, my mother sighed dramatically, sounding entirely exhausted by my logic. He just said he used a little bit of financial leverage to get the final approval through. Your father and I helped out. We all make sacrifices for family. You really should be completely happy for your sister. We are celebrating next Saturday, and I expect you to be there with a smile on your face to support her. Financial leverage. The two words echoed in the sudden terrifying silence of my brain. You and Dad helped out, I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Yes, Claire, we helped out, my mother snapped, her patience completely gone. Brittany deserved this house. We used a little financial leverage to help your sister secure the down payment. It is what good families do when someone needs a boost. Now stop being so incredibly difficult and let us enjoy this victory. She hung up the phone, leaving a harsh dial tone blaring directly against my ear. I lowered the phone slowly. I stood completely frozen on the Seattle sidewalk while the heavy rain poured down around me. The missing puzzle piece had just slammed violently into place, completing a horrific picture of absolute betrayal. We used a little financial leverage to help your sister secure the down payment. To secure a conventional residential mortgage, the bank underwriter demands absolute strict proof of funds. You must legally show exactly where the down payment originated to comply with federal anti-money laundering laws. If Marcus used his own bank accounts, the automated underwriting software would have instantly rejected the entire file due to his abysmal credit history and massive debt-to-income ratio. The cash had to look exactly like it belonged to me, or it had to be a formally documented gift. My parents were solidly middle class. They lived in a nice suburban home, but they did not have $100,000 in liquid cash just sitting casually in a checking account. Their entire net worth was securely tied up in their home equity and their federal retirement portfolios. The sickening absolute truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. Richard and Susan Sterling had completely drained their federal 401k retirement funds. They had willingly taken the massive early withdrawal penalties and the severe capital gains tax hits just to pull $100,000 in pure cash to hand directly to Marcus. They liquidated their entire future to buy a house for their golden child. But cash alone does not solve the underwriting problem. If a third party provides the massive down payment for a federal mortgage, the bank requires a certified gift letter. This is a strictly regulated legal document signed under penalty of perjury, stating that the money is a pure family gift with absolutely zero expectation of repayment or property equity. Marcus could not submit a gift letter stating the money was for him or for Brittany because neither of them were legally on the loan application. I was the sole primary borrower. Therefore, the gift letter had to be addressed specifically and exclusively to me. Marcus had drafted a fraudulent federal gift letter. He had illegally forged my signature claiming that the $100,000 was a family gift given directly to me, Claire Sterling, for the explicit purchase of a primary residence. And my own parents had willingly signed that exact same forged document. They had completely liquidated their entire life savings, their sole financial security for their old age, just to fund the very transaction designed to completely destroy my financial future. They were not just passive enablers who looked the other way while Marcus committed fraud. They were the active financial sponsors of a massive federal wire fraud operation. They had actively trapped me in the kitchen on Thanksgiving while Marcus stole my tax returns, and then they handed him their entire retirement fund to finalize the trap. They had completely insulated the criminal transaction. Marcus had fed the bank falsified tax documents, signed my name via a fake email address, and used my parents' retirement cash to close the deal. They all thought they were entirely untouchable. They genuinely believed that my deeply ingrained sense of familial duty would force me to simply eat the massive debt and keep quiet to protect the family reputation. They thought I would quietly pay the $5,800 monthly mortgage just to keep my sister from being homeless and to keep my parents from losing their retirement investment. They thought my pristine credit score and my massive corporate salary were simply family resources that they were entitled to harvest whenever they wanted. They viewed my independence not as an accomplishment, but as a selfish act that needed to be corrected through forced financial redistribution. I stood on the wet pavement gripping my leather briefcase. The biological imperative to seek their parental approval completely vanished, replaced by a permanent freezing clarity. The emotional death of my familial bonds was instantaneous and absolute. They had built a flawless financial trap to chain me to their toxic demands forever. But they had fundamentally misunderstood the legal architecture of the real estate asset they had just purchased using my name. I hailed another passing taxi to take me back to my penthouse. I needed to begin drafting the absolute destruction of my family. I returned to my Seattle penthouse and walked directly into my home office. I did not allow myself to sit down or rest. I took the raw digital logs I had just extracted from the Chase Bank Regional Director of Risk Management and laid them out carefully on my massive mahogany desk. As a user experience design director, I know exactly how to format complex data to force a specific outcome from the end user. I compiled the printed documents into a thick, heavy binder. I included the forged electronic signature certificates, the fraudulent Internet Protocol logs mapping directly to Marcus and his commercial brokerage office, the fake email domain, and my pristine credit report showing the unauthorized $700,000 loan. I added a highly detailed timeline of the Thanksgiving dinner, explicitly mapping out exactly how my physical tax documents were stolen from my leather tote bag. It was not just a random collection of papers. It was a meticulously engineered weapon of mass destruction designed for maximum legal impact. I hailed another taxi and directed the driver to the central precinct of the Seattle Police Department. The massive concrete building was an imposing structure completely disconnected from my sleek corporate world. I walked through the heavy double doors at precisely 2 in the afternoon. The reception area was chaotic, filled with exhausted police officers and highly distressed civilians. I bypassed the standard waiting area entirely and approached the elevated front desk. A tired desk sergeant barely glanced up from his computer monitor. I placed my hands flat on the scratched wooden counter. I need to speak with a detective in the Financial Crimes Division. Immediately, I stated my voice carrying a lethal, vibrating authority that instantly cut through the noise of the room. I am formally reporting a $700,000 federal wire fraud and severe identity theft scheme. The sergeant paused. He looked up slowly, scanning my sharp, tailored charcoal suit and the heavy leather briefcase I was carrying. "That is a massive allegation, ma'am," he said, his tone laced with standard bureaucratic skepticism. "Do you have any actual physical proof or just a suspicion?" I tapped the heavy leather surface of my briefcase. I possess the complete digital loan origination master file from Chase Bank, including the forged electronic certificates, the fraudulent Internet Protocol logs, and the fake digital signature trails. I have the exact commercial address where the federal fraud was executed by a licensed commercial broker. The sergeant blinked, realizing this was absolutely not a standard domestic dispute. He picked up his desk phone without saying another word. Minutes later, a man wearing a wrinkled gray suit walked out from the secure back hallway. He had the exhausted, heavy eyes of someone who spent his entire career looking at the absolute worst of human nature. "Miss Sterling," he asked, holding a yellow legal pad. "I am Detective Harris. Come with me." I followed him through a complex maze of crowded cubicles to a quiet, windowless office. He offered me a metal chair across from his cluttered desk. "Sit down," the detective said. "The desk sergeant tells me you have hard evidence of massive real estate fraud." I placed my heavy leather briefcase on his metal desk and popped the brass locks. I did not waste a single second with emotional backstories or dramatic tears. I spoke exactly as I present analytical roadmaps to my executive board. Pure, unadulterated facts. 2 days ago, I discovered that a licensed commercial mortgage broker named Marcus stole my physical tax documents during a family holiday dinner I began. He weaponized my immaculate financial profile to secure a $700,000 residential loan in Bellevue, Washington. I pulled out the thick, meticulously organized binder and slid it across the metal desk. These are the internal banking logs I extracted directly from the Chase Bank Regional Director of Risk Management this morning. They definitively prove the electronic closing signatures were executed from a fake email address created using my name. Furthermore, the Internet Protocol address attached to those forged digital signatures maps directly to his commercial brokerage office in downtown Seattle. He executed the federal loan documents from his own work computer. I did not stop there. I turned to the next index tab in the binder. This transaction also required a $100,000 cash down payment to clear the federal underwriting guidelines. Marcus does not have that money. My parents, Richard and Susan, completely drained their federal retirement accounts to secretly provide that cash. Marcus then illegally drafted a fraudulent gift letter, forging my signature, to claim the money was a personal donation directly to me. Detective Harris picked up the heavy binder. He pulled a silver pen from his shirt pocket and began tracing the lines of raw data on the electronic certificates. His initial skepticism completely vanished, instantly replaced by intense professional focus. He flipped through the meticulously tabbed sections, examining the Internet protocol logs, the fake email domains, and the timeline of the stolen W-2 forms. He leaned back in his squeaky metal chair, letting out a long, low whistle. He looked at me with a mixture of absolute shock and profound professional respect. "Miss Sterling," he said, shaking his head slowly, "in my 15 years in the Financial Crimes Division, I have never seen a victim walk in here with a perfectly assembled, ready-to-prosecute federal case. Usually people come in here crying with nothing but a confusing bank statement and a hunch. You just handed me a fully loaded weapon." He closed the heavy binder and placed both of his hands flat on top of it. "This is not just standard identity theft," he continued, his voice incredibly serious. "By knowingly transmitting fraudulent financial documents to a federally insured banking institution, your brother-in-law has committed severe federal wire fraud. The moment I officially file this criminal report, it goes straight past the local level and directly to the federal prosecutor's office. The commercial broker will permanently lose his federal license, face massive financial fines, and most likely serve a substantial prison sentence in a federal penitentiary. Are you absolutely prepared for the severe collateral damage this will cause your entire family?" I looked directly into his eyes, not hesitating for a single microscopic fraction of a second. "They are not my family, Detective Harris. They are highly calculated criminals who completely sacrificed my financial future to fund their own luxury lifestyle. I want the absolute maximum federal charges filed against every single person involved in this transaction. Do not hold anything back. Proceed with the official criminal report." Detective Harris nodded slowly, a grim smile touching the corners of his mouth. He turned to his computer terminal and began typing rapidly. For the next hour, I sat in that cramped, windowless office, providing a formal sworn statement on the record detailing every single interaction I had with the bank and my mother. Finally, the detective printed out a thick stack of official paperwork. He stamped the front page with a heavy red seal of the Seattle Police Department Financial Crimes Division and signed his name aggressively at the bottom. He handed me the certified copy of the complete police report. "This is your absolute shield, Ms. Sterling," he said. "With this sworn federal affidavit, the major credit bureaus are legally required by federal law to instantly remove the fraudulent mortgage account from your credit history. Chase Bank can no longer hold you legally liable for a single penny of that massive debt. We will begin drafting the formal arrest warrants immediately." I took the heavily stamped police report, feeling the undeniable weight of the crisp paper in my hands. It was not just a legal document, it was the ultimate key to my absolute vengeance. I thanked the detective, placed the red-stamped report safely inside my leather briefcase, and walked out of the precinct. The federal machine was officially activated. The trap was permanently locked. Now I needed to claim my physical prize. I stepped off the concrete stairs of the police precinct and immediately hailed a passing taxi. The certified police report inside my heavy briefcase felt exactly like a solid block of gold. I had successfully secured my absolute criminal defense against the federal banking institution. Now I needed an aggressive offensive strategy to handle the physical property itself. I gave the driver the address for the law offices of Roth and Associates, a prestigious real estate litigation firm located in the heart of the downtown legal district. I had called them from the back of the taxi to secure an emergency consultation, paying their exorbitant executive retainer fee over the phone without a single second of hesitation. I needed a shark, and their senior partner, Vivian Roth, had a terrifying reputation for being absolutely ruthless in complex property disputes. The taxi pulled up to a sleek, modern glass building. I paid the fare, grabbed my briefcase, and rode the silent elevator all the way up to the 40th floor. The polished receptionist ushered me directly into a sprawling corner office overlooking the vast gray expanse of the Puget Sound. Vivian Roth was a formidable woman in her late 50s, wearing a sharp navy suit and looking entirely devoid of patience for small talk. She gestured to the plush leather chair across from her massive oak desk. "Ms. Sterling," Vivian said, folding her hands over a yellow legal pad. "Your emergency intake form stated you are dealing with a complex title dispute involving severe federal fraud. Show me exactly what you have." I opened my briefcase and placed the printed credit report, the Chase Bank origination documents, and the freshly stamped police report directly in front of her. 2 days ago, my identity was stolen by my brother-in-law, a licensed commercial mortgage broker named Marcus. He bypassed manual underwriting, forged my electronic signatures, and secured a $700,000 loan on a luxury property in Bellevue. I just filed the federal wire fraud report with the Financial Crimes Unit an hour ago. That is the certified copy. Vivian picked up the police report first, her sharp eyes scanning the official seals and the highly detailed detective notes. She then picked up the printed property records, putting on her reading glasses to examine the fine print. She studied the documents in complete silence for 3 long minutes. The only sound in the large executive room was the rhythmic ticking of a heavy wall clock. Finally, she lowered her glasses and looked directly at me, a sharp, almost predatory smile forming on her lips. "Your brother-in-law is a spectacularly arrogant fool," Vivian stated smoothly, leaning back in her chair. "He focused entirely on manipulating the financial banking system to secure the massive loan, but he completely ignored the fundamental principles of real estate property law. Look at this property record, Ms. Sterling. Look specifically at the grantee line for the deed." I leaned forward, looking at the document she slid across the desk. "It says my name, Claire Sterling." "Exactly," Vivian replied, tapping the thick paper with her silver pen. "Because his credit score was absolutely toxic, and because the federal lender strictly requires the property title to match the primary approved borrower, the title company recorded this deed exclusively in your name. Marcus and your sister Brittany are not listed anywhere on this legally binding document. They have absolutely no legal claim to this luxury property. In the eyes of the state of Washington, they are not homeowners. They are nothing more than uninvited guests actively trespassing inside your house. You are the sole absolute owner of this estate." I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. The trap was even tighter and more devastating than I had originally realized. I legally own the house, I repeated, letting the magnificent reality settle completely into my highly analytical brain. But what about the massive down payment, I asked. My parents, Richard and Susan, secretly provided $100,000 in pure liquid cash to clear the closing costs. Can they claim equity in the property because they heavily funded the initial transaction? Vivian laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed loudly in the corner office. "Absolutely not," she declared. "When underwriting a conventional mortgage, any cash provided by a third party for the down payment must be accompanied by a certified federal gift letter. The underwriter would never have cleared the massive file without it. That specific letter legally binds the donor, stating under penalty of perjury that the money is a pure gift with zero expectation of repayment or property interest." "Marcus had to forge a gift letter to get this approved," I said, the realization hitting me with incredible force. "So legally speaking, your parents gave you a non-refundable $100,000 gift," Vivian confirmed, her eyes flashing with pure litigation excitement. "They have zero legal standing to file a lien or demand any sort of repayment from you. If they try to sue you for the money, they would have to stand up in a court of law and officially admit they actively participated in a massive federal wire fraud scheme to deceive a bank. They are completely trapped by their own criminal actions." The sheer absolute genius of Marcus and his own sloppy criminality had entirely trapped them. He had meticulously documented my parents' money as a formal gift to me simply to appease the banking algorithms. My parents had drained their hard-earned retirement accounts to fund a criminal enterprise designed to destroy my life, and they had legally handed me those funds on a pristine silver platter. The poetic justice of legally seizing their entire retirement fund was almost intoxicating. "So what are my immediate legal options?" I asked, leaning back in the leather chair and crossing my legs. "You have the ultimate leverage," Vivian said firmly. "Since you possess the stamped police report, you can freeze the fraudulent mortgage account, which completely absolves you of the criminal liability. But because you hold the sole legal deed, you retain the absolute legal right to liquidate the physical asset. I recommend we immediately hire a corporate real estate agent to list the property for a rapid private sale." We sell the house, use the proceeds to pay off the $700,000 loan balance to clear the bank completely, and any remaining equity, including that $100,000 down payment, legally goes directly into your personal bank account. You get to keep their retirement money as compensatory damages for the severe emotional distress and identity theft. My mind raced vividly, picturing my parents' faces when they realized their golden child's down payment was legally mine to keep. "And what about Marcus and Brittany?" I asked. "They are currently living in the house. They have all their expensive furniture moved in. They are hosting a massive housewarming party this Saturday night." "They are unauthorized occupants," Vivian said coldly. "I will draft a formal notice to quit the premises. Normally, residential evictions can take months to process, but because Marcus secured access to the property through documented federal wire fraud, the standard tenant protections absolutely do not apply. We can petition the county court for an emergency ejectment order based on severe criminal trespass. The county sheriff will physically drag them out onto the lawn." I looked out the massive window at the Seattle skyline. "I want the legal documents ready by Friday afternoon," I commanded. "I am going to attend their lovely housewarming party, and I am going to legally tear their entire world apart." I left the law offices of Vivian Roth and took a taxi directly back to my downtown Seattle penthouse. The cold rain continued to wash the city streets, but inside my apartment the atmosphere was entirely clinical and highly focused. I had the certified police report. I had the absolute legal strategy regarding the property deed. Now I needed to execute the professional assassination. As a user experience design director, I understand that taking away a person's physical assets is incredibly painful, but stripping them of their ability to generate future income is absolutely devastating. I walked into my home office and woke up my heavy workstation. I opened a secure encrypted browser and navigated directly to the Federal Consumer Portal for the nationwide multi-state licensing system. This federal database serves as the absolute central nervous system for the entire United States financial sector. Every single legitimate mortgage broker, loan officer, and financial advisor operating legally within the country is registered, constantly monitored, and strictly regulated through this exact system. Marcus held a highly coveted federal commercial brokerage license. It was the absolute foundation of his professional career, his sole source of legitimate income, and the primary source of his arrogant pride. Without that specific federal license, he was completely unemployable in any financial institution in the country. I clicked the bright red button labeled File a Formal Consumer Complaint. The federal portal immediately opened a highly secure encrypted form. I did not hesitate for a single second. I started typing with ruthless mechanical precision. I systematically outlined his severe professional and legal violations. First, I listed the direct violation of the Truth in Lending Act by deliberately forging federal financial disclosures. Second, I detailed his severe violation of the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act by submitting a fraudulent down payment gift letter to a federally insured banking institution. Third, I cited the direct commission of felony wire fraud by transmitting forged electronic signatures across state lines using a fake email domain. I meticulously entered his full legal name, his commercial brokerage firm details, and his unique federal identification number. The compliance investigators monitoring this federal system do not care about family drama, emotional excuses, or suburban housewarming parties. They care exclusively about strict regulatory integrity and federal law. I attached a highly compressed digital folder containing the certified Seattle police report, the fraudulent Chase Bank origination logs, and the digital signature audit trail proving the Internet Protocol address mapped directly to his commercial office. I reviewed the final complaint on my glowing monitor. It was an absolute masterpiece of corporate destruction. I clicked Submit. The screen flashed bright green, confirming the permanent upload of the catastrophic evidence. The exact moment I hit that button, the automated regulatory algorithms instantly flagged his unique identification number. The National Regulatory Board issued a mandatory immediate suspension of his commercial license pending a formal federal investigation by the Justice Department. I was instantly locked out of every banking portal in the country. He would not be legally able to originate a single loan check, a client's credit score, or collect a single commission check ever again. When his firm opened on Monday morning, the Corporate Compliance Department would receive the federal alert. They would immediately freeze his entire pipeline of pending loans, terminate his employment to protect their own charter, and likely seize his corporate computer. His entire professional existence was completely eradicated in a matter of seconds. With his career officially destroyed, I turned my attention back to the physical property. My email inbox chimed with an urgent high-priority message from Vivian Roth, my real estate attorney. She had moved with terrifying speed. Attached to the email was an introduction to a corporate liquidator named Sterling Vance. He was not a traditional family home realtor. He was a ruthless corporate asset manager who specialized in selling distressed luxury properties entirely for cash during hostile divorces and messy corporate bankruptcies. I called the number in the email. Sterling answered immediately, his tone brisk and entirely devoid of sentimentality. He had already reviewed the certified property deed and the legal memorandum Vivian had prepared. He understood that I legally owned a $700,000 property in Bellevue, completely unencumbered by any legitimate spousal or tenant claims. He also understood that the current occupants were entirely unaware that I held the legal deed and that they were about to be forcefully evicted by the county sheriff. "I have a private network of aggressive cash investors," he explained over the phone. "They specialize in acquiring luxury properties well below normal market value. They do not care about interior decorations or the emotional state of the current unauthorized occupants. They strictly care about the rapid legal transfer of the deed. Because we are dealing with hostile occupants, we will list the property strictly as a private rapid sale. No open houses, no public listing photos. We will secure a buyer today." Sterling sent over a thick electronic listing agreement. I read through the contract carefully, verifying his standard commission rate and the specific clauses regarding the rapid cash buyout. The terms were completely acceptable. I signed my name precisely on the digital bottom line, officially authorizing the rapid sale of the massive house Marcus had stolen my identity to purchase. Sterling promised to have a binding corporate cash offer on my desk by Monday morning, completely bypassing the standard 30-day escrow period. Once the title cleared and the massive funds were wired directly into my checking account, the new corporate owner would assume full responsibility for the property. I would use the cash to instantly pay off the fraudulent Chase Bank loan, clearing my credit profile completely. And the remaining $100,000 originally provided by my parents would stay securely in my account. I closed my laptop. The trap was now fully armed and entirely inescapable. I had systematically dismantled his financial security, his professional licenses, and his physical housing. I looked out the massive glass window of my penthouse, watching the heavy rain fall over Seattle. Tomorrow night I would finally attend their housewarming party and personally deliver their absolute destruction. Saturday evening arrived with a crisp, clear chill settling over the affluent suburbs of Bellevue. I bypassed the crowded street parking and pulled my vehicle directly into the sprawling circular driveway of the massive luxury property. The imposing two-story house was completely ablaze with warm, inviting light spilling out from towering custom windows onto the perfectly manicured lawn. I did not wear my standard corporate charcoal suit tonight. This specific occasion required a completely different type of psychological armor. I wore a sharply tailored crimson-red dress that commanded immediate, undeniable attention, paired with black leather stilettos that clicked with rhythmic authority against the stone walkway. In my right hand, I tightly gripped the heavy leather briefcase holding the certified police report, the emergency legal eviction notice, and the undeniable proof of his permanent federal license suspension. I pushed open the heavy custom mahogany front door without bothering to knock. The grand entryway was overflowing with extravagant floral arrangements and the loud echoing sounds of artificial upper-middle-class celebration. I stepped slowly into the massive open-concept living room, taking in the suffocating display of stolen luxury. Brittany had filled the expansive space with high-end designer furniture, expensive modern art, and towering champagne displays. Every single item in the room was a physical manifestation of my stolen identity and my parents' entirely liquidated retirement fund. The air smelled intensely of expensive catered food and absolute financial delusion. I stood quietly at the edge of the sunken living room, coldly surveying the active crime scene. My mother, Susan, was holding court near the massive marble kitchen island, wearing a new expensive silk blouse. She was laughing loudly, pouring expensive sparkling wine for her wealthy country club friends, and continuously boasting about her brilliant son-in-law. My father, Richard, stood proudly by the custom stone fireplace, projecting the false image of a wealthy, benevolent patriarch. They looked incredibly happy and perfectly insulated in their fabricated reality. They had entirely convinced themselves that their catastrophic federal wire fraud was simply a clever and necessary family favor. In the absolute center of the room, Marcus stood holding a heavy crystal glass of expensive scotch. He was surrounded by his amateur business associates and my sister's superficial friends. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit, holding his head high with the breathtaking arrogance of a man who firmly believed he had completely outsmarted the entire federal banking system. Brittany hung tightly to his arm, flashing her teeth for endless social media photos. As I watched, Marcus raised his glass high into the air, signaling for the loud room to quiet down for a celebratory toast. He was preparing to publicly celebrate his own fraudulent brilliance. He had absolutely no idea that his federal brokerage license was already permanently suspended. His career was entirely dead, and the county sheriff was scheduled to arrive at this exact address. I tightened my grip on the heavy leather handle of my briefcase and stepped directly into the center of the bright lights. The loud chatter of the living room faded into an uneasy murmur as I walked directly through the center of the crowd. The crimson red of my dress parted the sea of pastel cocktail attire like a sharp blade. I did not stop until I was standing less than 2 feet away from Marcus. He had his heavy crystal glass raised high in the air, but his arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second when he made direct eye contact with me. I did not raise my voice. I spoke in a low, terrifyingly calm register that only the 4 of them could hear. "Put the glass down," Marcus, I commanded. "The 4 of you are going to walk into the private study down the hall right now. If you hesitate for even a single second, I will walk back out that front door and call the Bellevue Police Department to swarm this entire property." My mother, Susan, gasped, pressing a manicured hand to her expensive silk blouse. "Claire, what on earth is wrong with you?" she hissed loudly enough for the nearest guests to hear. "We are in the middle of a beautiful celebration." I shifted my cold gaze directly to her, locking her instantly in a frozen stare. "The study, Susan, right now." The absolute chilling certainty in my voice left absolutely no room for negotiation. Richard grabbed my mother's arm, muttering a quick artificial apology to the confused guests standing nearby. Marcus completely abandoned his grand toast, lowering his glass with a rigid jaw. Brittany looked entirely panicked, clutching Marcus tightly by the sleeve. The 4 of them turned and walked quickly down the long hallway toward the private study located at the back of the massive house. I followed closely behind them, my heels clicking sharply against the imported hardwood floor. We entered the study, a dark, masculine room, staged with heavy oak bookshelves and a massive executive desk. The moment I stepped completely over the threshold, I pulled the heavy wooden doors shut behind me. The thick acoustic paneling of the expensive room instantly silenced the loud party outside. We were entirely isolated. Before I could even set my heavy leather briefcase on the surface of the desk, my father, Richard, instantly launched his aggressive, offensive strategy. He puffed out his chest, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me, just as he had always done when I was a child. "What is the exact meaning of this?" "Claire," he demanded, his face flushing with angry red patches, "how dare you march into your sister's home and threaten us in front of our important friends? You are deliberately trying to ruin her special night with your endless dramatic jealousy." I did not react. I stood perfectly still, watching them scramble to establish dominance over a situation they no longer legally controlled. "We know you found out about the mortgage," Susan snapped, stepping out from behind Richard. Her voice was completely devoid of the fake maternal warmth she had used on the phone. It was sharp and entirely venomous. "And frankly, we do not care that you are upset. We are a family, Claire. Family requires financial sacrifice. You make an exorbitant amount of money sitting in a fancy corporate office, typing on a computer all day, while your sister has been struggling for years. You have absolutely no husband, no children, and no real responsibilities. You are just a selfish, lonely spinster hoarding your wealth while your own flesh and blood can barely afford rent." Brittany chimed in, wiping a highly calculated fake tear from her perfectly contoured face. I deserve a nice house, Claire. You already have everything. Why can I not have just this one nice thing? You have plenty of money in your accounts to pay the monthly statements. It will not even affect your daily life. My mother stepped closer, pointing a finger directly at my face. You are going to stay completely silent about this transaction, Claire. You are going to pay the monthly statements, and you are going to do it with a smile on your face, because it is your fundamental biological duty to this family. If you try to make a massive legal issue out of this, you will completely destroy our reputation in this community. We will disown you immediately. We will tell everyone exactly how selfish and deeply unstable you are. You will be entirely cut off from the only people who tolerate your difficult personality. I absorbed their pathetic psychological manipulation without blinking. They were relying entirely on the antiquated programming of familial guilt. They genuinely believed that the fear of being isolated from their deeply toxic dynamic would force me to silently shoulder a fraudulent $700,000 federal debt. They were operating on an entirely obsolete emotional operating system. Marcus finally decided to step forward. He leaned casually against the edge of the heavy oak desk, crossing his arms over his custom-tailored navy suit. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unfiltered arrogance. He let out a low, mocking chuckle, shaking his head slowly, as if he were dealing with a deeply confused and highly emotional child. "You need to calm down and listen to your parents," Claire Marcus stated, his tone dripping with absolute condescension. "You are incredibly smart when it comes to designing computer software, but you clearly do not understand how real estate finance actually works. You have absolutely no play here. The ink on the closing disclosures is completely dry. The massive loan has been fully funded by the federal bank, and the title company has officially recorded the transaction with the county clerk." He picked up a heavy brass paperweight from the desk, tossing it casually in the air and catching it. "You cannot just call up a massive federal bank and say you changed your mind," he continued, a smug smirk spreading widely across his face. "I used your perfect financial profile to secure a completely locked, ironclad, 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. If you try to claim identity theft, the bank will launch a massive investigation that will drag on for years. They will freeze all of your personal banking assets. They will drag your corporate employer into a massive federal subpoena process. You will lose your executive job while you fight a completely losing battle against a billion-dollar financial institution." Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a harsh, mocking whisper. "And even if you somehow manage to legally prove I signed those papers, which you absolutely cannot do because I covered my digital tracks perfectly, you would be sending your own parents directly to a federal prison for supplying the cash down payment. You are completely boxed in, Claire. You are going to pay the mortgage on my new house every single month for the next 30 years, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop me." I let the complete silence stretch out in the heavy room. I listened carefully to his pathetic amateur analysis of the federal banking system and complex real estate law. The sheer volume of his professional ignorance was almost beautiful. He had built his entire criminal empire on the arrogant assumption that I was a passive, compliant victim who would simply surrender. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. He genuinely thought the game was entirely over. I looked slowly at my mother, then at my father, then at my sobbing sister, and finally I locked my eyes directly with Marcus. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply placed my heavy leather briefcase flat onto the center of the massive oak desk and popped the twin brass locks with a sharp, definitive click. The sharp click of his brass locks echoed like a gunshot in the soundproof study. I flipped the heavy leather cover open and calmly reached inside. I did not pull out a checkbook. I did not pull out a legal settlement agreement. I pulled out a thick stack of papers bound by a heavy metal clip. The top page bore the undeniable bright red seal of the Seattle Police Department Financial Crimes Division. I placed it directly in the center of the massive oak desk, right next to the brass paperweight Marcus had just been tossing. I slid the heavy document across the polished wood until it stopped mere inches from his hands. "That is a certified criminal affidavit," I stated, my voice cutting through the thick silence of the room like a surgical scalpel. I spent my entire afternoon sitting in a secure interrogation room with a senior financial crimes detective. I handed him the complete digital master file from Chase Bank and formally initiated a federal investigation. Marcus stared at the bright red stamp. His arrogant, smug smirk did not slowly fade. It simply shattered into a million pieces. He dropped his arms heavily to his sides, his eyes darting frantically across the bold black text of the police report. "You actually thought you covered your digital tracks?" I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "You are a commercial mortgage broker, Marcus, not a cybersecurity expert. You routed the forged electronic closing signatures through a fake email address, but you executed the final digital documents using the wireless network at your commercial brokerage office. The automated banking system logged your exact Internet Protocol address and stamped it directly onto the digital security certificate. You knowingly transmitted fraudulent financial documents across state lines to a federally insured institution. That is the textbook legal definition of federal wire fraud." The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him looking exactly like a hollowed-out ghost. The heavy crystal glass he had left on the corner of the desk suddenly seemed miles away. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. The physical reality of his catastrophic failure was completely paralyzing his nervous system. The detective I spoke with was incredibly helpful. I noted casually, watching his breathing turn rapid and shallow. He explained the strict federal sentencing guidelines to me in great detail. A single count of federal wire fraud carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Given the massive $700,000 value of this specific fraud, the federal prosecutors will absolutely seek a mandatory minimum of 10 solid years. You are not going to be living in a luxury mansion, Marcus. You are going directly to a federal prison. Brittany let out a sharp, terrified gasp. She grabbed Marcus by the shoulders, shaking him wildly and begging him to say something to prove I was lying. But Marcus just stood completely frozen, staring into the dark, terrifying abyss of his destroyed future. I turned my attention away from his crumbling facade and locked eyes directly with my parents. Richard and Susan were staring at the red-stamped police report with absolute, unadulterated horror. Their aggressive, arrogant confidence had entirely evaporated. "You both thought you were being incredibly clever," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, lethal whisper. "You thought you could secretly drain your entire retirement portfolio to fund his massive cash down payment and simply force me to foot the monthly bill out of family loyalty. But Marcus needed a verified gift letter to clear the strict banking underwriting process. He forged my signature on a federal document claiming your money was a personal gift directly to me, and the two of you actively provided the exact liquid funds to complete that specific fraudulent transaction." My mother's legs suddenly gave out. She stumbled backward, collapsing heavily into one of the leather reading chairs. She pressed both trembling hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with mounting terror. My father leaned heavily against the bookshelf, suddenly looking incredibly old and entirely defeated. "You are both legally classified as active accomplices to a massive federal conspiracy," I informed them cleanly, stripping away any remaining emotional delusions they harbored. "By intentionally providing the $100,000 in cash to facilitate a documented wire fraud, you are entirely liable as co-conspirators. The federal prosecutors will not view you as loving parents helping out your daughter. They will legally classify you as criminal financiers. You did not just sacrifice your entire retirement fund to buy this house. You sacrificed your absolute legal freedom." The suffocating silence returned to the room. The artificial joy of the housewarming party happening just outside those wooden doors felt like it belonged to an entirely different universe. The trap had officially snapped shut directly over their necks, and I was the only one holding the absolute legal key. I reached back into the open briefcase. My hand bypassed the remaining thick legal folders and pulled out a single sheet of standard printer paper. I placed it deliberately on top of the red-stamped police report. It did not have a flashy police seal, but to a commercial mortgage broker, this specific piece of paper was infinitely more terrifying. "Look at the screen capture, Marcus," I instructed, my voice entirely devoid of any human sympathy. "That is a direct printout from the nationwide multi-state licensing system federal portal, taken precisely at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon." Marcus dragged his heavy eyes away from the police report and looked at the new document. The color that had slightly returned to his cheeks instantly vanished again. He physically staggered backward, his legs hitting the edge of a heavy leather reading chair. "When I filed the formal complaint with the Federal Regulatory Board, I included the digital signature logs tracing the wire fraud directly back to your commercial office," I explained slowly, ensuring every single word penetrated his panicked brain. "The automated system immediately flagged your unique federal identification number. Your commercial brokerage license is officially and permanently suspended pending the massive criminal investigation. You are currently locked out of every single banking portal in the United States. I continued watching his breathing become dangerously erratic. Your corporate compliance department was notified instantly. They have completely frozen your entire pipeline of pending loans. Every single commission check you were expecting this month is entirely gone. You have been formally terminated from your firm, and because you now possess a severe federal fraud flag, you will never be legally permitted to work in the financial sector ever again. You cannot originate a loan, you cannot advise a client, and you absolutely cannot generate a single cent of legitimate income. Your career is completely and permanently dead. The absolute finality of my words hung heavily in the soundproof room. Marcus gripped his chest, gasping for air as a full-blown panic attack seized his nervous system. But the most dramatic reaction did not come from Marcus. It came from the woman standing right next to him. Brittany stared at the printed paper and then looked directly at her husband. The artificial, supportive wife persona she had been performing all evening completely evaporated. She was deeply materialistic and entirely dependent on the strict illusion of wealth. The terrifying realization that she was suddenly legally tethered to a completely broke, unemployed federal criminal shattered her fragile reality. "You told me you were a senior partner!" Brittany screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysterical rage. "You told me you were making millions this year. You told me this massive house was completely covered by your special financial programs." Marcus tried to reach out to her, his hands shaking violently. "Brittany, please," he stammered weakly. "I can fix this. I can call my corporate lawyers." "Fix it!" she shrieked, slapping his hands away with violent disgust. "You stole my sister's identity and you completely lost your job. We have massive credit card debt, Marcus. How are we supposed to pay for the leased cars? How are we supposed to pay for the expensive country club? You completely ruined my life, you absolute pathetic loser." She lunged at him, beating her fists frantically against his expensive, custom-tailored navy suit. Marcus did not even try to defend himself. He just stood there absorbing her vicious blows, completely broken and entirely hollow. My parents watched in absolute silent horror as their golden child violently turned on the man they had sacrificed their entire life savings to support. The flawless, wealthy facade they had all meticulously built together was tearing itself apart right in front of my eyes, and I still had the final legal document waiting inside my briefcase. I watched my sister violently tear into the man she had proudly flaunted just 5 minutes ago. I let her scream until her throat was raw. Then I reached into my heavy leather briefcase for the absolute final time. I pulled out a thick stapled packet of legal documents printed on heavy archival paper. I dropped it heavily onto the oak desk directly on top of the suspended federal license and the certified police report. The loud, solid thud instantly silenced my sister's hysterical screaming. "Look at the top page, Marcus," I commanded, my voice echoing with terrifying finality. "Tell my parents exactly what that document is." Marcus leaned forward, his hands shaking violently as he read the bold legal print. "It is the property deed," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Read the grantee line," I snapped. "Read it loud enough for the entire room to hear." He swallowed hard. "Claire Sterling," he choked out. "Sole owner." "That is exactly right," I said, stepping right up to the edge of the desk. "Because your credit score was entirely toxic. The federal underwriter absolutely demanded that the property title strictly match the primary approved borrower. You completely blinded yourself with your own arrogance. You focused entirely on securing the massive loan, and you completely ignored the fundamental principles of real estate property law. You put my name, and only my name, on the legal deed. In the eyes of the state of Washington, none of you are homeowners. You are simply unauthorized trespassers illegally occupying my physical property." I pointed to the second page of the packet, "and that is an emergency ejectment order signed by a county judge this afternoon. Because you secured access to my property through documented federal wire fraud standard, residential tenant protections absolutely do not apply to you. I have already signed a binding legal contract to sell this entire property to a corporate asset liquidator for pure cash. You have exactly 48 hours to pack whatever fits into your leased luxury cars and vacate my premises. If you are still inside this house on Monday morning, the county sheriff will arrive and physically drag all of you out onto the lawn in front of all your wealthy friends." My father Richard suddenly let out a strangled, agonizing cry. The arrogant, patriarchal facade he had worn his entire life completely shattered. He stumbled forward and fell heavily to his knees, directly onto the expensive imported rug. He grabbed the fabric of my crimson-red dress, his face completely wet with desperate tears. "Claire, please," he begged, his voice a pathetic, broken sob. "Please, you cannot do this. We completely drained our entire retirement fund. We took the massive early withdrawal penalties. That $100,000 was everything we had left in the world. It was our entire future. If you sell the house and keep the money, we will have absolutely nothing. We will be completely bankrupt. Please, Claire, you are our daughter. Have some mercy." I looked down at the pathetic, broken man kneeling on the floor. I felt absolutely zero biological connection to him. I felt no pity. I felt no familial duty. I felt nothing but the freezing, absolute clarity of total victory. I stepped back, pulling the fabric of my dress sharply out of his desperate grip. "I do not have a father," I stated coldly. "As for your massive retirement fund, you seem to have completely forgotten the legal architecture of your own federal crime." To secure the loan approval, Marcus drafted a certified federal gift letter. He forged my signature claiming that the $100,000 was a non-refundable personal gift given directly to me with absolutely zero expectation of repayment, and you actively funded that exact criminal transaction. I picked up my empty leather briefcase and secured the heavy brass locks. Legally speaking, that money is a certified gift. I continued looking down at him with absolute zero emotion. I am keeping every single penny of it as compensatory damages for the severe emotional distress and the massive identity theft you all actively orchestrated. I will use it to pay off the fraudulent bank loan, and the rest will sit securely in my personal checking account. I turned my back on my completely destroyed family. The four of them were trapped in the soundproof study, financially ruined, legally devastated, and facing severe federal prison sentences. I opened the heavy wooden doors, stepped out into the loud, bright hallway, and walked straight out the front door into the cool Seattle night. Monday morning arrived with a biting coastal wind that swept across the affluent Bellevue neighborhood. I pulled my vehicle up to the curb precisely at 8 o'clock. I was not wearing a corporate suit or a crimson dress today. I wore a simple black cashmere coat, standing comfortably on the perfectly manicured sidewalk. I stood with my arms crossed over my chest, watching the final act of my architectural destruction play out exactly as I had designed it. Standing immediately to my right was the heavy-set county sheriff. He wore a crisp beige uniform and rested his hand casually on his utility belt. I had provided his office with the emergency ejectment order signed by the county judge. He was not here to negotiate. He was here to physically enforce the absolute boundaries of real estate law. The heavy custom mahogany front door swung open. The arrogant, fabricated illusion of wealth that had suffocated this property just 36 hours ago was completely gone. Marcus and Brittany stumbled out onto the expansive stone porch, looking entirely unrecognizable. They did not have an expensive professional moving company to carefully pack their designer furniture. They did not even have matching luxury luggage. Because Marcus had his federal brokerage license suspended and his banking portals permanently frozen, they had absolutely no access to liquid capital. They were carrying their remaining personal possessions in cheap black plastic garbage bags. Marcus walked down the stone steps first. His custom-tailored navy suit was replaced by wrinkled sweatpants and a stained hooded sweatshirt. The arrogant smugness that usually defined his entire personality had been completely hollowed out, leaving nothing but a highly visible shell of absolute defeat. He dragged 2 heavy trash bags across the concrete driveway, the thin plastic tearing and scraping loudly in the quiet suburban morning. Brittany followed closely behind him. Her perfectly contoured makeup from the weekend was completely washed away, revealing dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. She was struggling to carry a massive pile of expensive designer clothing that was slipping off plastic hangers and dragging directly across the wet pavement. She looked completely pathetic, stripped of the artificial luxury she believed she was genetically entitled to. As they reached the bottom of the driveway, the heavy grinding sound of a diesel engine shattered the morning silence. A massive commercial tow truck backed aggressively into the cul-de-sac, its yellow lights flashing brightly. The driver hopped out, checking a clipboard. He did not ask for permission. He walked directly up to the pristine white luxury sports utility vehicle parked on the street. It was the exact vehicle Marcus had leased to project the false image of a highly successful commercial broker. Marcus dropped his garbage bags on the wet grass and ran toward the tow truck driver, his voice cracking in total panic. "Wait, you cannot take that vehicle," he pleaded, waving his hands frantically. "I just need a few days to clear up a banking error. My accounts are temporarily locked." The driver did not even look at him. He attached the heavy steel chains to the front axle. "You missed 3 consecutive lease payments, buddy," the driver said loudly over the roar of the diesel engine. "The bank issued the repossession order on Friday. Step back from the vehicle or I will have the sheriff arrest you for interfering with a legal recovery." Marcus backed away slowly, watching in absolute silent horror as the heavy steel cable pulled his last remaining symbol of artificial wealth directly onto the flatbed of the tow truck. He had no job, no money, no house, and now he had absolutely no mode of transportation. Brittany completely snapped. The sight of the luxury vehicle being hauled away broke the final fragile thread of her sanity. She dropped her pile of expensive silk dresses onto the muddy driveway and turned her absolute pure hatred directly toward me. "You completely ruined my life," she screamed, her voice echoing wildly across the wealthy neighborhood. She lunged forward, her hands curling into tight fists, aiming directly for my face. "I am going to kill you, Claire. I am going to destroy you." I did not even flinch. I did not move a single muscle. Before she could cross the final 5 feet of concrete, the county sheriff stepped rapidly in front of me. He grabbed Brittany by the shoulders, spinning her around with terrifying physical force and slamming her face directly against the brick pillar of the mailbox. He pinned her arms aggressively behind her back, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Listen to me very carefully," he growled directly into her ear, his voice vibrating with absolute legal authority. "You are currently trespassing on private property, and you just attempted to assault the legal owner in front of a sworn law enforcement officer. If you speak one more word or make one more aggressive movement, I will arrest you right now, and you will spend the rest of this week sitting in a concrete county holding cell. Do you understand me?" Brittany began to sob, uncontrollably, hot, pathetic tears streaming down her face as the cold reality of her absolute powerlessness finally crushed her. She nodded weakly against the cold brick. The sheriff released his grip, shoving her roughly back toward Marcus. "Pick up your garbage and start walking," the sheriff commanded, pointing a heavy finger down the long suburban street. "You have exactly 2 minutes to clear this neighborhood before I call for backup." Marcus reached out and grabbed his wife by the arm, pulling her away from the property line. They picked up their ripped plastic bags and began walking down the sidewalk entirely on foot. They had nowhere to go. They had no money to rent a hotel room. They were facing severe federal wire fraud indictments and total financial ruin. I stood on the wet grass watching their pathetic retreating figures get smaller and smaller until they completely disappeared around the corner. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I turned around and walked up the stone steps to wait for the corporate asset liquidator to arrive. I stood alone in the massive, empty living room of the Bellevue property. The suffocating noise of the weekend party was permanently gone. The silence inside the house was absolute and incredibly peaceful. Within an hour, Sterling Vance, the corporate asset liquidator, arrived. He walked through the front door wearing a sharp gray suit and carrying a sleek leather folder. He did not admire the expensive custom windows or run his hands over the marble kitchen countertops. He was a professional who only cared about the legal transfer of the deed. He walked directly to the kitchen island and placed the final closing documents on the cold stone surface. I reviewed the contract terms one last time. The private investment fund was purchasing the property entirely in pure cash. There were no bank appraisals and no lengthy inspection periods. I signed my name precisely on the digital signature lines, legally transferring the physical asset to the new corporate buyers. Sterling checked his digital tablet and sent a secure message to his financial team. Less than 10 minutes later, my cell phone vibrated in my dark cashmere coat pocket. I opened my highly secure banking application. A massive corporate wire transfer had just successfully cleared directly into my primary checking account. The rapid sale was officially complete. I did not waste a single fraction of a second. I immediately dialed the direct line for Julian Pierce, the Regional Director of Risk Management at the Chase Bank corporate headquarters. I calmly informed him that the physical property had been successfully liquidated and I was authorizing an immediate wire transfer to entirely satisfy the fraudulent mortgage balance. I executed the massive digital transfer while he remained on the line. I watched my computer screen as the terrifying $700,000 loan balance dropped instantly to zero. Julian confirmed the receipt of the massive funds. He formally assured me that the Internal Fraud Division was officially closing the account and that the 3 major credit bureaus had completely wiped the fraudulent transaction from my history. My immaculate credit profile was completely restored to 100% perfection. The massive federal debt that Marcus had attempted to chain around my neck was permanently eradicated. I was entirely free from their toxic financial trap. But my retaliatory architecture was not entirely finished. I stood at the marble kitchen island and looked at the updated balance in my personal checking account. After the massive bank loan and the corporate closing costs were completely satisfied, exactly $100,000 remained untouched. This was the pure liquid cash my parents Richard and Susan had secretly drained from their retirement accounts. This was the money they had willingly surrendered to fund a federal crime against their own daughter. According to the legally binding documents Marcus had forged, this money was a non-refundable personal gift. I opened my encrypted wealth management portal. I did not intend to let their stolen future sit idle in a basic checking account. As a technology director, I fundamentally understand how to maximize the efficiency of every available resource. I navigated to my primary brokerage account and initiated a massive new trade. I took their entire $100,000 retirement fund and purchased thousands of shares in a highly aggressive technology-focused exchange-traded fund. It was a highly profitable investment vehicle designed to compound wealth rapidly over the next decade. My parents had completely liquidated their entire future to buy a fake reality for my sister. Now their literal life savings would actively generate massive passive income for my personal portfolio. Every single quarter, I would receive a substantial dividend payment directly funded by their catastrophic betrayal. It was the absolute ultimate financial poetry. I had not just survived their coordinated attack, I had ruthlessly monetized their criminal behavior. I locked my phone and slid it back into my coat pocket. The massive luxury house was no longer my legal responsibility. The incoming corporate owners would change all the exterior locks before sunset. Marcus and Brittany were currently wandering the streets with their cheap garbage bags, facing an incoming barrage of severe federal wire fraud indictments. My parents were sitting in their quiet suburban home, completely bankrupt, and waiting for the federal investigators to knock on their front door. They had completely destroyed their own lives trying to steal mine. I walked out of the massive mahogany front door for the absolute final time. I did not look back at the sprawling manicured lawn. I walked down the long concrete driveway and climbed into my vehicle. Tomorrow was Tuesday. I had a massive corporate presentation scheduled with my executive board, and I was perfectly prepared to deliver a flawless user experience strategy. I started the engine, pulled out of the quiet, affluent neighborhood, and drove back to my peaceful, pristine life in the city.